Okay, this is Liam Hanlon and I'll be making a new series of videos, the best reasons that God exists. I'll be going on and doing videos explaining reasons that I think, showing scientific reasons for how I think a God could have created the world, the universe and life, the existence of life. I'll be going on and explaining scientific reasons for how I think a God, a omnipotent mind, an omnipotent entity or existence of some kind could have created existence as we know it. And I'll be going on and I'll be explaining the best scientific reasons why, to show how that could have been possible, the best scientific reasons that we know of now to say that that could have been possible, and also trying to conceptualize the God thing and also trying to find some reasoning within the universe and make an explanation of some long-held questions that are hard to answer about the nature of God. And so it won't just be about how I think a God could have created everything, it'll also be about maybe trying to answer and drill down into some of the questions about why a God would have done things, or why we see injustice and why we see various types of things. So I've just come from making videos about explaining how evolution couldn't have been true. So now I'm going to go on and try to formulise my theory and do the best reasons that God does exist. So I will be unapologetically using the frame of reference God as the creator of all things in these videos. So let's go on now to the themes of creation. That's just a kind of to show that there are similar themes in creation around us that would maybe give us a hint that there is a God, and to just kind of lay the groundwork for what's coming next and give a few teasers to what's coming next that hopefully people will be interested in. So if you're an artist, then you have a distinctive style, and artists draw in distinctive styles. They are probably genetically born with an instinct for art, but when they actually draw, all artists, the overwhelming majority of artists, will have a distinctive style that is very distinctive to them, and it'll be more than just the fact that they were born as a good drawer and having vivid pictures in their minds. Probably as hard as they tried, they probably couldn't get away from their distinctive style that was just genetically ingrained in them. Every single time that they draw, they probably have a distinctive style that they just cannot get away from. It's naturally, intrinsically part of them. So we can tell that when we look at artists. Now, what I'm going to be going on and saying, obviously, is that we can tell the same thing when we look at creation around us. When an artist draws with a distinctive style, they're leaving their fingerprint everywhere. This was me, this was my artistic style. And what I'm going to be obviously going on and saying is that when we look at creation around us, then we can say the same for God, that he has left his fingerprint on everything because he has a distinctive style in the things that he has created. Okay, so veins. Also, I'll be just using the word he for God. There is no neutral word in the English language for neutral sexuality, so because I'm a man, I'll just be using the word he. So, veins, right? Okay, so your body is basically made up of veins that carry your blood and carry all the nutrients that you will need to keep your system, your biological system, functioning. That's what your veins look like all through your body, just millions and millions of veins. That's all the veins in your face. But it's not just the human body that's full of veins, it's also the rivers of the earth and the waterways of the earth. If these rivers and waterways didn't exist, then life wouldn't be able to exist as we know it throughout the landscapes that we see around us. And the veins that are, when you pan out from the earth, you realise that the rivers and the waterways are exactly like veins, and much like the blood in the human system carries the living nutrients to all of the organs and the systems that require everything to work, it is exactly the same with water and rivers. The rivers carry all the water that can bring life with it and sustain life. So there's the rivers of America. Someone mapped all the rivers in America and it looks exactly like veins. That's what it looks like up close. That's the top of mountain hills, and those look exactly like veins also. There's some more riverways, and it's exactly like veins carrying the lifeblood of what is required to sustain life. And there is a river system as well. Now the next thing is, that also looks very much like a tree, so we're starting to see similar themes in God's fingerprint. Another thing is that when we look at a tree, we see this, and because our brains like to organise things into manageable chunks, that's how we perceive a tree. But a tree's not actually that. A tree is actually what's underneath the ground, also the roots. So a tree is, and the roots are very, very much like veins. So the roots of the tree, so we've got the blood within the systems of all the animals that carry the blood and allow the system to work. They're like veins. The water that flows on the earth, when you pan out, they're exactly like veins. The trees which create the oxygen, they have vein shapes all throughout their roots. And that is what trees are like. So on the left there is a heart and its aortas, and on the right there is a tree and its root system. So they look exactly the same, and that's God's fingerprint, God revealing his similar ways of designing things in his artistic strokes. Another thing about trees is that it is very reminiscent conceptually of the human conscious and the human subconscious. Things aren't just what you see, things are more than what you see. So a tree is more than what you see. The tree itself, the beautiful part, is above the ground. It creates oxygen for life and all these wonderful things, and that's the conscious part, the observable part of the tree. But the actual roots of the tree, what created it and allowed it to grow, is much like the human subconscious. So humans aren't just their conscious mind, humans are also their subconscious mind. So all things that are alive probably have things that are observable, which sustain their life, and they also probably have a subconscious, a spiritual nature to them also, which preserve their life. So it's very, very similar themes again that we're seeing in God's fingerprint, that he has created beings that are also have complexity beneath the surface with the subconscious mind. So there's veins also in leaves, the leaves that are not just the veins on the roots and the veins in the waterways, as we're saying. For a leaf to function, it also requires veins. There's the veins on the leaf. And there is a single cell of a skin cell, and it shows you that there's a vein in that also. And just also to look down at the micro scale, much like the conscious and the subconscious, the scale that we observe around us, the scale that we live on, is extremely, extremely complex and teeming with life. And also when you go down to the micro scale that we cannot even observe, is also teeming with life. And that is how, just a small example of how complex the existence of life is. At the single cell of the skin that has a purpose, that does something we can't actually really fathom when we look at our skin, that it is just lots and lots of skin cells interlocked together, and maybe that skin cell has a consciousness itself and it feels like it has to do its job, it has to perform its job as a skin cell. So much again like the tree, which has the branches and the trunk above the ground, it also has the roots below the ground. And much like the human conscious and the subconscious, we're seeing the repetitive themes that God has created. He's created the what we consciously see and can observe around us at this scale, and there's also the micro scale of things living and teeming with life on the micro scale that we cannot even actually fathom or see with our own naked eye. So that is what the beach looks like when the tides have came in and went away. It leaves vein shapes. So more vein shapes in the sand there left by the tides. So God's fingerprint again, showing that he creates similar themes. He creates things with similar shapes. So there is a completely dry desert landscape, and that also, the sandstorms have blown that into a vein shaped landscape. So carrots, right, we think that because we have become detached from nature itself, we think that a carrot looks like this. But in reality, carrots and all the various vegetables and plants that grow, they grow in stunning complexity. They grow in very, very weird ways and weird shapes. A natural carrot really doesn't look anything like that. So what I'm saying is that you would maybe look at your own foot and think, well, that's a really strange shape. That is not a shape that would come naturally from the landscapes of life itself. But actually it is we have become detached from our reality, and we think that our foot and the way that our body is shaped, it was sculpted by evolution or it was sculpted by natural selection. But actually there's a lot of evidence to say that it wasn't, because these natural shapes are created by nature all the time, by God's fingerprint. This is the shapes that God likes. These are the shapes that God thinks are successful shapes. So carrot's looking like a foot there, another carrot exactly like a foot, another, is that a turnip? Exactly like a foot. A carrot exactly like a hand. An apple exactly like a face. A pumpkin exactly like a face. A tomato exactly like a face. Is that a turnip again, exactly like a face, but more specifically like some kind of witch or scarecrow face? So there's a tendency within the natural gene codes that God has left on the earth to create all these different types of shapes, and we think that we are unique and we were evolved beings that are the pinnacle of evolution, but in actual fact these types of shapes are being created all the time by God's fingerprint, God's design. So there's a aubergine that's exactly like a human face, a pepper that's exactly like a human face. So these similar shapes are being created all the time. There's a potato that's exactly like a bear, a tomato that's exactly like a duck, a cucumber that's exactly like a duck. We have become detached from our reality. Is that ginger root that's like a snake? So these shapes can be created all the time naturally in the environment. A potato that's exactly like a frog. The peach is a perfect representation of a bum. Again, the peach being a perfect representation of a bum. Like, we think that we're unique and we're the only people and that the bum is a strange thing. Well, to nature the bum isn't a strange thing. To nature the bum is just two circles that have been put together, and it's something that works. God, when he was creating, God knew that this was a successful shape, so he's created it across the beings that he has designed. He's gave nature the capability to create these shapes naturally all the time, and we've become detached from our reality and we think that we are special and unique. But is that really the case? There's a carrot shaped exactly like the bottom half of a man. Again, the same. A carrot shaped exactly like a penis. So the penis is just a shape, that's all it is, and the penis is a useful shape that is used in nature. So similar to like if a car designer, an inventor, a painter, if they discovered that a shape was useful for the things that they wanted to design, then they would use that shape. They would say, oh man, that shape that I used, that was a brilliant shape for me, allowing to have a delivery system. All the penis is just like a delivery system. And that time that I invented that shape that led to that delivery system, you would then use that again and again in other things, because you thought, well, that is a successful shape, I'm going to use that shape. So almost like a geometry master. Let's say that God is a geometry master, and that he, when he laid down the groundwork for reality, he made it inclined that reality would continue to create these types of shapes because they're useful shapes, they're successful shapes. So carrots and vegetables and fruits can show reminiscence of other similar things in nature, like human beings there, a human being there, a dancing human being. This was a famous one, the hip hop carrot. Now another thing is that the way that Western culture especially has went, but the way that humans are now, they think they're so special, they think they're very special, and they think that they've got everything pegged, and they think they've got the answers to everything. And atheism's very trendy, atheism's very popular, and there's nothing wrong with being an atheist. If you want to be an atheist, that's fine, but what I'm saying is, look at all the creation around you, and even science will admit that it doesn't really know how these things were created, how they came about. It has what it thinks is a good idea. That's up for debate. And so we think that we have reached this pinnacle, and we think that we are now the pinnacle of evolution. We think that we have reached the end, the nexus point of all life. But in reality, when you think about it, every single animal, every single organism that's on this earth, it lives and it needs to eat, and it needs to sustain itself. So it eats, and then it needs to get rid of its waste. It needs to excrete its waste. So every single thing eats and excretes waste, and that comes in various forms. Now, plants take in carbon and then they breathe out oxygen, so their waste is actually our lifeblood. A plant's waste is our lifeblood. So all of these things link in. It shows you how well nature actually works together, and I would suggest if something works that well together, it's a designed process by, as we've seen, a geometry master there who knows all the shapes that need to be created, and then also you've got spiritual things, emotional things, things like that. But what's strange is that we think that we are the pinnacle of creation now. We think we are the pinnacle of all life, but every single one of us, we need privacy. We go behind a closed door to do the toilet. We go behind a closed door to do a poo and to do a pee. We think we're so great, but we spend a lot of our life, a lot of our time shielding our most private moments. And that's God. God makes you go to the toilet. God makes you realise that you need to react with the environment to actually sustain your life. And it's very embarrassing for us. We all know what doing the toilet means. It smells, it's dirty, it creates mess, and we are scared to, you've got a family, you've got people that you have completely close ties with and your workplace. You still need to go to the toilet in your workplace, but you hide that. You hide that as a really, really private moment, and you think that you're a superior being who is almost about to, if you fully endorse the theory of evolution, that we think we've got people now, human beings, who think that they are on the verge of becoming some kind of superhuman, but they're scared to even let their family know, or they're scared to share the human experience with even their most closely loved ones. We need to go behind a toilet door to even just do a normal, basic human natural function that is happening all the time in every single organism in nature. But we think that we are so special, but at the same time we're kind of being fake with society, and we're saying, well, I don't do a poo, I don't do a pee. It's like we don't want other people to know that we do poos and we do pees. Like, everybody does it. You need it to sustain life, and we are so embarrassed by that. And only a God could create something that every single person needs to go and have time to reflect and do a poo and do a pee every single time. Every single being, every single biological organism needs to pay its penance to God, and God's kind of saying to you, look, you think you're great, but you go behind a closed door just to do a poo and do a pee, and you wouldn't even want your own family to come into the toilet immediately after you and know what you had done, but you think that you're so great, etc., etc. Now, another thing is that, okay, so we've looked at some of the shapes and things that God has created, and that we think that we are so special as human beings, and we think that we are the pinnacle of all life. So now let's look at what man has created. When man has the chance, with all of his knowledge and all of his vivid imagination, what kind of beings can man create from his own mind? And so we've got to look to art for that. And so basically every single time that we look at beings that are created by man, it is just basically a slightly perverted version of what God has already created. So God's fingerprint can create all of the life that you see around you, absolutely teeming with life. And as I said, also on the microorganism level, not just the level that we can observe, it's absolutely teeming with life. And when you give man, who thinks he is the pinnacle of all evolution, if you give him the chance to create a being in his own mind, what he thinks a completely new being could be, an alien being, and he really can't do it. He cannot even formulise what a completely alien being would be like. The best that he can come up with is a human being that's got big ears and a funny forehead, a human being that's got a big forehead, a human being again with a big forehead, another human being with a forehead, a human being that's got big ears, a dog, an anthropomorphic dog that can walk and grunt. Even like Star Wars is one of what we consider to be one of the most vivid artistic creations that man has created in the history of art. And even one of the best characters, Yoda, is rumoured to be based on a tarsier monkey that can hunt in the trees, and it can leap from the trees, grab birds, etc. mid-flight. It's a very successful hunter, but the actual being itself is dwindling in number. So even in what man considers to be one of his most successful pieces of art, he has essentially just looked at what God has created and copied it. That's how he's done it. And Star Wars deserves credit. It does, because Star Wars has created, vivid beings that are interesting to look at, and creates an atmosphere, and has created a range of beings that are, quite artistically successful. But unfortunately, even if this is one of the best examples that we have of creating art and what man can create in his mind, you would have to say that every single time all it is just merely a perversion of what God has already created. We can't even in our minds formulate what a new being might be, whereas if you look at God's fingerprint, he has created new beings all over the place. So let's now go on and look at some of the things in comparison that God has created. So the water bear, this is something that lives on the microorganism scale, the water bear. It's a very successful survivor. It's also been found that it can survive in space. And also, just to let you know, some of the things that might crop up in the next few slides will maybe on occasion be a wee bit scary or a wee bit off-putting, so prepare yourself. That is what the water bear's mouth looks like, even closer zoomed in. So it's an extremely complex being, quite scary. Something that you would expect to see in like a Hollywood movie, something like that. And that is actually what a water bear looks like to our eyes. So that's what the water bear actually looks like, and you've just seen it there. So the complexity of things that God can create compared to the things that man tries to create, there's a big massive difference. There's a barrier there that man's imagination can't go past, but God, who is a geometry master and all these various types of things that I'm referencing, shows that there are no limits to what God's mind can create. There's a goblin shack. Now, that's something that would really put a real sense of fear into you if you ever came across that. Now, it's a very strange looking thing. You wouldn't possibly even believe that that was. If someone drew that and you didn't know that was a real being, you would probably think there's no way a real being like that could actually exist, but that is something that God has created from his mind, and it's also something that would really strike fear into you. And if you can emotionally connect to something just by looking at it, it shows you the ramifications of what God can do with his mind. There's a leatherback turtle, right? Have you ever seen inside a leatherback turtle's mouth? So there's them opening the mouth. And that is what the inside of a leatherback turtle's mouth looks like. So these beings that God creates, they're infinitely complex, and that's a very scary image, what is inside a leatherback turtle's mouth. There's no way that man would be able to recreate something like that from his own mind, just something purely out of nothing. Everything that man has created in his imagination has been inspired by what God already created. There's a sea lamprey. It's something that lives in the water and just feeds off of other people's blood, other animals' blood sources. Now, it's not just disgusting creatures, there's a lot of disgusting creatures. So again, we're already seeing that nature itself is quite chaotic. There's something that seems naturally evil about nature, and there's also something that's naturally good and wondrous about nature, and these two things, conflicting forces, are constantly in play. And maybe perhaps if they weren't constantly in play, the existence of life wouldn't continue to go on. But it's not just scary things that God creates with his mind, like the sea lamprey. It's also beautiful things like this Mexican salamander type of animal, the axolotl. There's an axolotl there, a lovely creature. There's a pangolin there. That's a nice, lovely creature. And again, because of God, I can look at this thing's eyes and anthropomorphisize the way that animal is standing right there. That makes me think, he's shy right now, he's worried, he's a bit tentative. He's unsure about this situation and he's shy. That's what I'm reading into this pangolin in that picture. So is that necessarily true? Does this being have the emotions that I am reading into it? But anyway, that's not the point. The point is that when God creates beings, he doesn't just create beings. Like, if evolution was true, surely all the beings are just completely separate from each other and there's no real reason for them to interact or have emotions with each other. But the very fact that I can look at an animal and have emotional ramifications from that, it shows you the power of God's creation. So I'm reading into that and feeling sorry for this kind of timid little guy. But is that necessarily true? I don't know. But the point is that the experience of life, the experience that we have around us, is more than material. It's much, much more than material. I'm reading emotions into this guy's face, but that's maybe not necessarily true. But the experience of life is way more than the physical representation of things. It's emotions, it's spirituality, it's things that can't be read or measured. There's a shoebill stork, that's a beautiful creature. So God just doesn't create evil things or nasty looking things that are hard for us to understand. He also creates stunning beauty in life and landscapes. There's a blue parrotfish, that's a lovely animal. And then he's there in the water and he looks very, very happy with himself. So do you think that you would ever say that a snake was beautiful? So it's not just things that we classically see as being evil, right? Would you ever think that you would say a snake was beautiful? And maybe you've never heard of the Atheris hispida viper, and that's a very beautiful snake. So something that we would classically see as being dangerous or nasty or evil, associated with those connotations, God can also create variability within those things. He can show you something that is what we would inherently class as being evil or nasty, and he can create beauty in that environment also. And there's the Atheris hispida viper also. Now, do you think that you would ever say that a form of sea slug is beautiful? Then maybe you've never heard of Glaucus atlanticus. The Glaucus atlanticus, the common name for it is the blue dragon sea slug, or a variation of those words, but it's the scientific name is Glaucus atlanticus. And that's it when it's swimming, and it's a very beautiful creature. And there it is in a human's hand to get you the idea of size. So God has created all of these beautiful things, but when man tries to create things from his own mind, and we see ourselves as the pinnacle of life that has been created, we cannot deviate very much from what God has already created. Whereas God is creating so many wondrous things on an unimaginable scale, at the micro scale, at our scale, at the universe scale. So again, when man thinks that he's so special and that he's designed various things, what actually has happened is that he's looked at nature and he's seen the way that things fly, seen the way that things move, looked in using a microscope to look at something's wings and see how those wings have been put together by God's fingerprint, the way that he designs things, because as I previously explained, he's a geometry master. Whoever created all of this must be a geometry master, because he knows exactly how to use the maths and put the shapes together, how the wings will be created, and those things can perform extremely expertise functions. And then man thinks that he's special by looking at what God has created and then recreating it. So a lot of the things that we have created for our own technology is actually just looking at what God did and copying him. So the kingfisher's beak was the inspiration for the Japanese bullet trains, because the kingfisher can fly very fast and it cuts the air in front of it with its beak. Elephant's trunk there. We must have looked at the elephant's trunk and realised it's a very capable grabbing machine mechanism. The stealth bomber was modelled on, I'm not sure what that bird is anymore, a kestrel, we'll just say, or a hawk. So the stealth bomber was modelled on a hawk in its flight shape. So honeybees, they put their honey in hexagons, and a hexagon, found much later by science, is to be one of the most strongest tensile strength shapes that you can get. But honeybees knew this before man even knew it. So God creates, as I say, like God with his fingerprint, he knows what the successful shapes are, and he gave honeybees the desire to create their honeycombs in a hexagon shape. So honeybees create their honeycombs in a perfect hexagon shape. Why is that? Because God has given reality the tendency to create the shapes that he knows are successful shapes. When you would look at how an animal would grip, okay, so a lizard would be a very good animal at gripping and running up things. Now, so how has man then designed gripping things when he has went to design gripping things, and he's obviously just looked at what actually happens in nature. There's the pads of the lizard's feet and toes and fingers, and they are kind of multi-layered oblong shapes that allow it to grip. Just various other. The examples are so expansive, I couldn't possibly name all the examples that man has copied from nature, but these were just some of the better explained ones that I can find. So the wetsuit we have copied from a shark's skin. A bat's wings was the inspiration for boat sails, so it's a very successful shape and a very successfully designed, useful invention. Yeah, so a tire there that's mimicked on the skin of an armadillo. Velcro, very similar to plants that God has already created. So now let's look at flavour, right? So can you even think of a flavour that wasn't created by God? Can man design a flavour that doesn't come from nature? I don't know. Is that possible? So even vanilla, nuts, onions, dairy, every single thing that motivates us as beings to stay alive, something very simple like eating something, again, is all completely created by God, and all the wondrous flavours, like his imagination knows no limits, and he can just carry on, go on and creating all of these things, and we think that we are special because we can farm and we can, we have created successful living systems, but we could never create an onion from nothing, we could never create a cow from nothing, we could never create a vanilla pod from nothing. We just have to manipulate nature and what God has actually created, and we couldn't even create a flavour that is out with what God already created. And these are the things that motivate us to stay alive, eating food, simple pleasures like that. A few of us have been trying to come up with a flavour that is not derived from a natural source or a combination of natural sources. The closest we could come up with is caramel, but caramel is basically burnt sugar, I think. Are there any flavours that are commonly used that are chemically produced and palatable? One person suggested plastic, but until we see plastic flavoured candy, we are not counting his answer. Can anyone help us? This conversation has been going on long enough in our staff room. We need someone to help answer this for us. So it's not just me who thinks these things and notice these things. Other people are saying there literally just isn't even a flavour that wasn't created by God. So who invented armour, for example? The first forms of armour that we look back in history and that we can see was Japanese samurai warriors, and that's from the 4th century, which was 300 years after Jesus' time. So man didn't create armour until 300 years after Christ. Civilized society is supposed to have originated around 5,500 years before Christ, but the armadillo can lock itself into a little ball and it's got an armoured skin, and a rhino has got a skin that is said to weigh a ton, and that is armour. And so God had invented armour from the moment that he invented the beings on the planet. But actually further back than that also, because Earth's atmosphere could be described as an armour for Earth to the outer universe. So without the very, very thin layer of Earth's atmosphere, life on this planet wouldn't be able to exist. So it cancels out UV rays from the sun, allowing for life to exist, and it protects us from the vacuum of space. So no life on Earth would be able to exist without this protective layer, this armour. So God invented that also. So going straight back, he invented armour instantaneously from his mind. So the brain, you could say that a computer is similar to a brain, a computer being one of man's greatest inventions. The first being that they say could be described to have a brain is a flatworm, and we know the flatworm from 270 million years ago. So the Colossus was man's first attempt really at a computer, and that was invented in 1943. But the brain is actually far more complex than a computer, because all a computer can do is perform designated tasks at a high speed level. So for example, the Tian-2 is considered to be the number one computer in the world at this moment in time. The Tian-2 is holed up in China's National University of Defense Technology in Guangzhou. Tian-2 is the world's top system with a performance of 33.86 petaflops, achieving quadrillions of calculations per second. Tian-2 uses Intel Xeon Phi processors and is named after the Milky Way, so the Tian-2 is very good at performing quadrillions of calculations per second. But the brain, which was invented by God, is infinitely more complex than that. Your brain controls your blood pressure, your breathing, your consciousness, your heartbeat. It allows you to taste, it allows you to have subjective experience, it controls your movements. You can read art, you can do art yourself, you can look at things and define them subjectively. You have behaviour, you have personality, you have intelligence, you have memory, you can move, you can speak, you can read, you can feel things. So this is all things that the brain interprets, and that is processing things at millions of times per day, whereas man considers himself to be the pinnacle again of everything. But the best thing that he can do is get a computer to perform high rate mathematical calculations at very high speeds, but the computer couldn't do anything close to what a brain can actually do. So some other examples here. The voltaic pile was the first form of electricity, official form of electricity that we know that was invented by man. So man sees himself as being an incredibly intelligent species, but a lot of the things that he invented were already in existence. So if it takes a lot of man's power and knowledge to create something as complicated as electricity, then why do we not match it and say, well, if electricity exists, it must have been a complex process that was created by someone. If man's an intelligent being and he can figure out electricity and create it, then why do we not do the same analogous thing when we look at nature and see that there's electricity? Do we not say then that that was also invented by an intelligent being? So man invented the voltaic pile in 1800, and that did produce electricity, but just a very small amount of electricity for a few hours. I think something like that. It wasn't very successful, and from there on they invented the gravity cell in the 1860s, which was much more successful, and then the dynamo in 1866, which became industrialised, produced electricity, successful electricity. But God invented electricity, and we know that electric eels exist, and they produce electricity as a defence mechanism, and we know electric eels from 200 million years ago. And sharks and stingrays use electroperception. Electroperception is an electromagnetic field. They can sense an electromagnetic field around their bodies, and if something enters that zone, they can sense that the animal's there, and then they can use that to attack prey. And I think it's also used in navigation. So God invented these animals, and he invented the use of electricity for those in a very complex process from 420 million years ago. We know sharks from 420 million years ago. And then again, we can go back even further and say that 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth is said to be 4.5 billion years old. So from that time, electricity, lightning has existed. So it takes a lot of man's mental powers to actually create electricity, and we would then look at electricity and say, wow, that's an amazing thing, someone really intelligent must have invented that. We don't do the same when we look at nature, even although it's very complex and highly technical things that's going on. We don't look at nature and say, wow, it must have been an intelligent being who invented those things. So it got me thinking that a lot of the things in science, a lot of what man has created has actually come from just noticing what happens in the world that God made. So just basically copying the ideas that God has already done, and also being inspired by the things that you see around you to create something. And that was all comes from God's mind. A lot of the things that we think comes from man's mind actually is an extension of God's mind, not man's mind. So the famous story about Archimedes, who got in a bath and realised that the water was displaced, and so he then realised that if he placed objects in water, the amount of water that they displaced would be equal to their body weight or their weight. And that is something that was fundamental in science, and the truth is that he didn't actually really come from that from his own mind. Although he was a smart man, he was actually inspired by the world around him. A lot of you'll find that when you look at individual scientists, a lot of scientific discoveries are actually made from observing God's world, and taking inspiration from it is actually more proof of an extension of God's mind rather than the pinnacle of man. So it got me thinking that we're very conceptually in the modern world with atheism and evolution and things like that. We're very, very turned off to the idea of an otherworldly presence that created things, some type of super intelligent being or entity who created things from another dimension, another world, another arena of some kind, where conceptually we can't imagine it anymore because of the things that we've done in science, and we're against it because of the prominence of secularism and atheism. But the sun is not of this world, okay? The sun's not of this world, and it is the giver of life on this planet. So we actually do have examples of otherworldly presences giving us life on this planet. So I just think that if conceptually that you can look to something in reality and point out that that does happen, then what makes you think that conceptually it can't happen from the entity of someone's mind creating things? So the sun is the star at the centre of our solar system. It's perfectly spherical, it's got magnetic fields, it's 109 times the size of Earth, and its mass accounts for basically 100% of the total mass in our solar system, and it's only made up chemically of hydrogen and helium with a very, very small percentage of other elements. So something that is simple and extremely complex at the same time. In my opinion, only a god could create something that is simple and complex at the same time. So the sun is larger than all of our planets put together, so it shows how imposing and how wondrous the sun actually is. So let's look into how the sun is the giver of life and sustains life. Without it, nothing around us would exist, nothing would be here. Since the sun powers all life processes on Earth, the long history of life on Earth is only possible because the sun has sufficient energy resources to burn for thousands of millions of years. In fact, the coal and oil and gas we are burning in such profligate fashion represent solar energy collected by life forms over more than 200 million years ago. So even the things that we use to sustain our modern living systems was made by the sun millions and millions of years ago. The energy provided by the sun has to come in at the right amount, shape and form to be useful to life on Earth. Life cannot use X-rays or radio waves as an energy source. Visible light is just right. The plants use it to make plant matter by photosynthesis. We and many other organisms use it to see. Likewise, the amount of energy delivered by the sun to our planet is just right for the hydrologic cycle to work, with water and water vapour changing back and forth, and some minor amount of ice collecting near the poles. Thus the climate is between cold and warm, dry and wet, just about right. So that goes to show how the sun basically powers every form of living process on this planet, and it shows how important the sun actually is to life on this planet. And the sun is an otherworldly presence. It's not of this world. So conceptually, the idea that another worldly presence does provide life on this planet is clear, and it's in front of us. It logically exists, it literally exists, it conceptually exists. And if we can point to indicators that these things exist, this is one of the points that I'm making about the themes of creation. If we can look to see these themes, then we must kind of try and put the pieces of the puzzle together to get the next level, the higher picture. And conceptually, materially, literally, physically, another entity, another worldly entity provides life on this planet. So if that's true, which it is, then what I'm saying is that that could exist. If some of the science that they're saying is possible, that it's possible that we live in a multi-dimensional universe, then if conceptually and literally it does exist that another worldly source provides life on this planet, then it can also exist from another dimension, is what I'm saying. It can also exist from another dimension, or something like that, that another entity provided life on this planet, the same as what we see with the sun providing life on this planet. And another thing that I would think is that if there was a God who did invent life on this planet, he would probably give you indicators that he did that. And a lot of the things that we see in space, things that we're finding out about in space that we've never seen before, they're cropping up. Synchronicity, a thing that's called synchronicity. And what synchronicity is was conceptualized by a man called Carl Jung, is that if there's a lot of synchronicity, things that you notice happening that are a bit too random to happen regularly, that you notice them, then it's basically what that is the universe is trying to tell you something. And so when we're now seeing, we're at the pinnacle of the science that we have produced, and we're actually now seeing things that is coming back to us. They're quite spiritual things, and they're very, very reminiscent of other things that we already know of. For example, they found this nebula and it blew up, and everybody was interested in it, and it was called the Hand of God. And what they found was that this nebula was very, very similar looking to a hand. And another thing is that if you look at some of the nebulas, you'll notice that they are exactly like a human eye. They're reminiscent to the human eye. And here's some more nebulas that are very, very reminiscent of the human eye. And I'm suggesting that that's synchronicity, and that's the universe trying to tell us something. It's trying to tell us something that we should notice. We should put the puzzle together and notice these things. And again, there's the Helix Nebula looking perfectly reminiscent of the human eye. And I just wanted to get into the male and the female. Again, I'll explain it in more detail in my future video, but the male and the female is around us all the time. It's in everything in nature, and what I'm saying is that the male is basically just the penis shape, and what I'm saying is that God knows the successful shapes to create things. And if we look at here, there's the banana as a penis shape basically, and so it's natural for things in nature to grow reminiscent of the male and the female. And so again, like with the universe, when we look out into the universe and we see the nebulas that look like the eye, it's God giving us messages that we should figure out, and nature is also giving us these messages that we look into nature and see things that are inherently linked to ourselves, these similar shapes that are constantly found throughout nature. So penis shapes is obviously a successful shape that can administer life and administer forms of successful systems for life to emerge from. There's many things in nature that's extremely similar to the female sexual organs, like that, very reminiscent of the female sexual organs. Again, that's very reminiscent of the female. So all the male and the female really is, the male is a delivery system and the female is a vessel. The male is like a kind of thrusting of the life, and the female is the womb, it creates the life. And so we see nature isn't just many animals and things that have developed over time independently. When we actually look at nature, we see these similar shapes and similar ideals that are very, very reminiscent of what things that we already know that are crucial to life. That's very similar to the female, and all that really is representative of a vessel. Very, very reminiscent of the female sexual organs, and that's around everywhere. That's everywhere around is the male and the female. That's a plant that grows to have leaves that look exactly like lips. That's very reminiscent of female reproductive organs. So basically, all the penis is just a delivery system for creating life. And the female is a vessel system for creating life. And if you look at the female sexual organs in the womb, it's very, very similar to the plants that we were looking at. So, and the penis shape that we can see in nature all the time is obviously a successful shape that God knows that's a successful shape, so he's used that shape throughout nature very many times. It's not an evolutionary thing where this animal created this, plant created this, came out of nothing. That's not really what it is. It's an intelligent being knows the techniques, the models, the methodologies, the shapes that are successful shapes. All the penis is a delivery system, and the female sexual organs and womb is a vessel system. And it's very, very reminiscent of these things that we see in nature all the time. But as humans, we have kind of grown apart from our nature, and we've lost that real connection, the real daily reminder that of these similar shapes all through nature that are more reminiscent of a common designer, not examples that we come from a common ancestor and that all life, the solar system itself has come about by chance. I'm saying that's not. When we look around us and see all these various shapes that are so reminiscent of each other, it more points towards a common designer. Another thing that I wanted to just mention is that, so God knows all the successful shapes, etc. Okay, now one of the greatest achievements that man has ever done was go into space, and basically how we get into space is that a space shuttle gets fired up on a big massive phallic symbol, a big penis shape basically. So what man has done to do his greatest achievement, his greatest scientific achievement to get into space, he just copied God's shape, a shape that God designed, the penis shape. And so that is how the shuttle gets into space. It dissects the atmosphere using that phallic shape, and that is how man has gone into space. So man thinks that he can do everything, but basically, essentially, he has just copied everything the way that God has designed things, and that's all he's really done. So when we look around, we see all these synchronicity, we see all these indicators that there was a common designer, then surely we must eventually come to the conclusion and the realisation that somebody, an intelligent, omnipotent mind, or presence perhaps, was at the centre of the design of this universe. When things all work together accumulatively so very well, then you would have to say that it negates the idea that it happened by chance, and it would have to have been a designed process. So who is at the centre of this process? Whose hand is behind this design? Whose fingerprint is behind this design? Is it a mind? Is it a spiritual mind? Is it an entity? We don't know, but when so many things accumulate in the direction of an omnipotent mind, then I think there comes a point where we have to have intellectual integrity and say that it is possible. So just wanted to end on this note. Now, people listening to me, they're not going to be convinced of the story that I'm trying to put across, but there are many people a lot smarter than me and a lot more important to history than me who have had the same thoughts that I have. And what I'm saying, this is one of the better quotes that I found for something that I want to explain. Now, this is so complex that I can't even properly understand it or explain it, but I'm going to go ahead and try. So C.S. Lewis, the writer of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe and the Chronicles of Narnia, he said that my argument, one of the things that stands out in the modern world against God is the idea that a kind of common theme that stands out in the world against God in the modern times is the idea that the world is very unjust. And so how can we expect that there is a God if the world is unjust? And what C.S. Lewis realised was, in his quote, he said, "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust?" And so what that means to me, I think what the basic premise of that is that we are born as vessels of God's creation, and from the moment that we are born, we actually have imprinted ideals about the world for us to be able to learn. We actually have things that are born, that are inborn in us, they are innate. Our brains, the human brain, and I'm assuming the other forms of animals, if it's in the human brain, I'm assuming that it's also present in all the other living beings. So what it is that from the moment that you're born, your brain is like a motherboard, and it can analyse information in different ways. And so you are actually born. From the moment that you are born, you have the capacity to learn, and your brain will break down the sensory information, words, from pictures, from speaking, from movements, from body language, etc. Your brain will organise all of these things so that you can then build on that and become a successful human. But what the idea is, you don't start from nothing. You start from a foundation point. You are born with innate foundation points in your brain and in your living system that allow you to even build upon that and create a successful mind that can live and survive in the world. And so what that means is that we are judging God's world, but what other world are we comparing it to? We don't know any other world. And the whole idea that I can judge the world from my brain because I have subjective ideals and I'm smart enough to judge the world, but at the end of the day, the whole foundation of my knowledge comes from a period of time when I was born, and I had an innate sense to learn things, that I was born with the innate sense to learn things like all brains and all minds are. So how can you possibly be born with a system that allows you to learn and be successful and add on information into that, but you actually already had like you already had kind of like downloaded content from the moment that you were born that allowed you to even organise all this information, the sensory perceptions and the knowledge and language. You were actually born with a kind of downloaded motherboard, and then your motherboard organised all that information for you, made you think that you were such a successful human being that you could then go out and judge the world. But at the end of the day, the only reason that I can judge the world is because I was born with like a downloaded motherboard, and every single human being, every single brain on this planet is downloaded with a motherboard from the moment that it's born that even allows it to survive. So how can we not say that there is something outside of tangible reality that allows things to exist, that allows all beings to exist? There is something outside of tangible reality that is given these animals the downloaded motherboard from the start. And that's my take on what C.S. Lewis said, and I already had ideas like that in my head, and I was so glad to find out that he had ideas like that in his head. So his quote is that my argument against God was the universe seemed so cruel and unjust, but how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? So there's also elements in there is that who do we think that we are to judge this world? When what other world, if we're so smart, why can't we create another world, another universe, and go and live in that universe and go and live in that world? We just simply can't do it. So where do we get off judging this around us? Any mistakes that we have made have been our own mistakes, not God's mistakes. So I just think this is a very, very interesting concept, and I think to me it relates to the downloaded motherboard that's in every single being's living system and brain. You're able to actually download information, take information and break it down into manageable chunks for your brain, and then analyse it, process it, and become then from there a successful human being. But at the end of the day, every single living organism has a motherboard of intelligence. Before you can speak, before you can see, even before you can properly taste things, before you can properly touch things and understand what they are, from the moment that you're born, you're learning how to even analyse the world and what it is. But you do have an innate motherboard of intelligence that allows you to become a fully realised human being, and so does every single animal and every single living being. So then we become smart, and then we think, well, I can judge this world, but kind of forgetting that you once couldn't even fend for yourself, and that the motherboard of intelligence that is maybe possibly connected to a hive mind or something like that. But how can every single thing that is born have this motherboard of intelligence? And it's very, very hard to explain, but that's the point that I've got to. But it's still very, very interesting also at the same time. So this is just a start off to see the kind of themes, as I was saying, that the themes, the very similar themes that run through nature and run through all things. I am saying that if there are similar themes that run through all things, then we must assume that the same person designed all of those things. And for example, the way I would put it is that when a human does something, if I, as a human, created a computer and you looked at a computer, you would say, wow, this guy's a genius, he can create a computer. But for some strange reason, when we look at the things in nature around us which are infinitely more complex than a computer, we don't come to the same conclusion that a smart, intelligent being designed that thing. Even although as man, even with all their science and all their knowledge, we cannot actually create living beings. So we can create living beings by having sex with each other and using God's method. We can use God's method to create new beings, but we can't actually create. The only way that we can create things is by going through God's mechanisms. And so we have to make this leap that there is design in nature, there is a fundamental and innate knowledge. The knowledge comes before the person. That's what I'm trying to say. The knowledge actually comes before the fully realised person. You've got knowledge within your innate system that allows you to learn. Then you become a person. Then when you become a person, you say, I don't believe in God, or I do believe in God, etc. But with every single being, the knowledge comes before that being really knows what it is. So if you have knowledge, innate knowledge that comes before you were an actual person, then who put that knowledge there? And how did that knowledge get there? And that's what C.S. Lewis is saying. That's my interpretation of what C.S. Lewis is saying. So what I'm going to be going on in my next videos, this is part of a series I'm making called The Best Reasons That God Exists, and my next video will be actually the best reasons that God exists, the best scientific reasons, mathematical reasons, etc., for why we must assume that a God exists. So that's the next video. The next video is going to be kind of top 10 or whatever, however many numbers it is, of the best reasons why God exists. And this is part of a series of videos I'm making called The Best Reasons Why God Exists, and this is just an introductory part to kind of open up your mind to some ideas, try and get you hooked on interesting information for me to deliver what I think possibly is the best reasons that God exists. And this is part 1, the themes of creation. And if we can see all these similar themes in creation, then why don't we ever come to the conclusion that a master designer, a master geometrist, realised that there were very successful shapes and he administered them into genetic beings? So let's go on to my next video then. Okay, thank you. Bye.